one of the things, so the reason why I call this Sustainable Transformation Camp is because I've been in a work environment where I, for the last 10 years, have been working in a materials technologies company. And we have a sustainable product where, you know, we were trying to launch it as sustainable. And I kept coming across all these different roadblocks around sustainability. So it wasn't really what I expected, and it didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to. And there's so much more to sustainability than just, let's say, counting carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide or whatever you're counting these days, methane, right? Mm. And one of the things, so we're having a few sessions. We're doing one on stories. We're doing one on fashion. We're doing one on, I'm losing it. I'm blanking here. But we're doing one on innovation. Yes. And also one that we call Beyond Sustainability. And so how does stories fit into that? I think, you know, innovation and clothes, you could probably imagine how it fits into it. But when it comes to stories, how does it fit into it? So I think I'm not going to say so much more about that. It will become apparent, I think, in how we see stories. And so to ground myself, because I definitely need it a little bit, I invite you to participate in a short breathing exercise with me, just to find a little bit of calm and also to find a little bit of here and now-ness. And then I'll go through the outline and then we'll start the discussion. All right, so this is a simple exercise. Bill, actually, you're responsible for teaching me this. We will do, I don't know what it's called, but I think about it as box breathing, where we will breathe out for a 5 count. We will hold for 5. We'll breathe in for 5. We will hold for 5. We'll breathe out for 5. So I'll count it out for you. And it'd be great if you just want to join me in this. Eyes open, eyes closed, as you wish. Just sense into the moment. We start with breathing out in, well, now. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe in, 3, 4, 5. And hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 4, 5. Hold, 4, 5. In, hold, out, hold, in, hold, last round, out, hold, in, and breathe as you like. Thank you. So the idea is that I have 2 amazing panelists, and it's Bill and Martin, and I have some fantastic technical help from Melker. So first of all, I invite all of you to just share in the chat and participate in the discussion. We'll do a little bit of a fishbowl to start with for 50-ish minutes. And then we'll open up and do more of a workshop. And I don't know, Bill, do you feel inclined to start introducing yourself? And I invited you to do it with 1 sentence, and then also, what is your favorite story?
What is my favorite story? Well, my one sentence introduction is that I'm on a journey of self-discovery and a seeking of there must be more than what I was originally told. And that's taken me through a lot of different iterations of development and growth. And one of my favorite stories, I just use this with a client because of the work we're doing, is a guy falls in a hole and a doctor comes by and he yells up, "Hey man, would you help me out?" Guy writes a prescription, throws it in, walks away. So the prescription says, well, this is going to help. A therapist comes by. Guy says, "Hey, can you help?" Guy looks in the hole, writes in a couple of questions, throws it down in the hole. Guy says, "This doesn't help." A priest comes by. Guy says, "Hey, priest, you must be able to help me." He goes, "Sure, I can." Writes a prayer, throws it in the hole. And the guy looks at it and kind of goes, "This is nice, but it doesn't help." And then finally, a friend comes by. He goes, "Joe, hey, I'm in the hole." He goes, "Oh yeah." And his friend jumps in the hole with him. And the guy in the hole goes, "What the hell did you do? Now we're both in here." And the friend goes, "Yeah, I know, but I've been here before and I know the way out. So let's go." That's one of my favorite stories recently.
Thank you. That's awesome. Martin, my other distinguished panelist, would you also like to, I invite you as well to introduce yourself for the one sentence and then your favorite story.
Yes. So I hear myself. Problematic.
Zencastr, switch it to Zoom device is what helped me.
Where do you see that though?
Mm.
No, I think no, it's still there. Wait.
Joseph, there's a spinning wheel at the top right of Zencaster where you can change your audio outputs and inputs.
Yeah, it doesn't. I can't click that wheel.
Because it's recording. I'm going to stop the recording and
that's why.
We'll just do it through Zoom. Doesn't matter. We'll throw out Zencaster.
Yeah, so I'm sorry about that. I should have checked this. I didn't notice it before. I can still hear myself though.
Close the Zencaster window. I think that's the key. I just threw it out. So.
If you want to capture it, we can do the settings and start that again. But no, should I shut it down?
Just shut it down.
Okay.
We'll do it through
Zoom.
So,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's actually my full-time work, I would say, then, to try to research the question that you started the discussion with, Amit, which is how we can understand how we can get consumers to be more sustainable or act more sustainable and be more receptive to that. And yeah, so I'm a PhD student in that topic. And my favorite story, I think I interpreted the question a bit differently than Bill, but that's maybe interesting because then you get two different types of stories. I think my favorite story probably is that like this paradox where at the same time, because I'm also very interested in well-being and stuff like this, and you realize that very few external things actually make you happier. It's more about from the inside. But at the same time, what makes me happy is being in the process of chasing something. And for me to motivate myself to be in this chase for something and be in that process, I'm also telling myself a story how cool it will be when I reach that state. But I also realize that I'm very happy at the same time. So, but it's also interesting because I was also thinking like the favorite story I have, I'm probably not even aware of because it's so intrinsic to my own personality or something. You know what I mean?
I love that, Martin. It brings up this idea is that the favorite story that we have might be the story that we hear other people tell about us.
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah, it's probably something about your own ego or like self-image for sure. So yes.
It has to be from a good friend who knows you, right? And so the story is probably not comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
But it gets
Exactly
at
like
something that is undeniably you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then I mean, what comes up as well when you say that is like it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that knows you. It's just if you've told your story recently and just getting it reframed. I mean, that's also a super powerful. It's an experience that I've recently had, and that was like almost life changing, like almost like a little glimpse of like a Satori experience to have that happen to you.
Can you
But
say more?
well, I could. Well, sure. I mean, I was working with Maria Paz is on the call, and when we met the first time, it was kind of we were thrown together by Niels, who is one of the co-founders of World of Wisdom.
He likes to do that to people.
Yes, and he said you guys should talk, and so we talked, and then I started led off by this sort of you know, who am I, or what have I done rather than who am I, and she reflected that back to me in a very beautiful way by saying like, so I hear that you're a very persistent person that finds something that's important and pursue that, and this put it like in a way in my head it was not at all the framing that I had for my own story, and that reframing was very, very powerful, and we didn't know each other at all, so just a mirror. So thank you for that, Maria Paz.
Beautiful.
That was a lovely gift.
What a gift.
And one of the things I wanted to start this exploration, we're going to keep it very free flowing, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on what is story.
Martin, would you like to take that first since I led off the last time?
Sure. For me, a story. Yeah, I research how to get people to be more sustainable, and a big part of that is, of course, marketing then. And for me, stories is a very powerful vehicle that you can use to get people to act in certain ways or believe certain things. But then you also have many different purposes for which you can use a story in so many different ways depending on what type of story it is. So one story could be like, if you do this, then this will happen. You will get status, you will get accepted, you will have this outcome, etc., etc. So it's very much encompassing of almost all types of marketing that are more highly engaged in some way, where people are interacting with it, interacting with the communication. Because of course we have marketing that is pure like, buy this now. That's not much story. That is just, but that also works, of course, but it works in a different way. But then you have like the more highly involved messages, and then stories is a very great tool for that.
Very nice. I wonder if I could share my screen. I'm gonna try to share my screen.
Are you allowed to?
I don't know. Let's see.
Are you trusted? You
Does it
should
let
be able
me?
to, yeah.
Can you see this? Does
I
this
like
come
that.
through? Oh yeah.
Yep. All good.
So in a workshop that I do with clients and individuals, this campfire imagery comes to mind because stories to me are the containers of wisdom that we pass along through the ages. And so if you think about civilization, so much of our ancestry is based upon oral traditions, right? It's a very short period of time that we've actually had things written down, and an even shorter period of time that we've had it all digitized and copied everywhere. And so for me, at the root of it, stories are this fundamental vessel to connect humans, not only on this call live, but across the ages. And it's our telling of each other of like, what is this thing? How do we understand and make sense of this thing that we're inhabiting, this game that we're playing? And that campfire imagery comes to mind when I think of story. And so they shape us, they shape our worldview. Like I loved your story, Amit, about how you heard your story back to you. And it instigated a different understanding of yourself. And so, yeah, I think they're vessels to connect us across the ages. They are ways that we are understanding our worldview and making sense of things. They are instigators for action. And they're scaffolding that help us keep reflecting in this process of development.
I like that. I think those are two really interesting aspects of story, and I think to just add an additional frame, or like at least the way that I think about it as well, is that stories are. It's I think it might be already encapsulated in what you guys were saying, but you know, this whole aspect of it being a tool, something that you can use, and also a very very powerful psychological tool. And like, if we look at the story that you tell yourself about, so there is a famous experiment by a person called Dweck. I think, I don't know actually what gender that person is, but it's a researcher that done like an exercise with kids where you were able to really measuring problem solving ability or intelligence, but there were three groups. One group was told or were primed to believe that intelligence or problem solving ability was a trait. The second group thought of this problem solving ability as a something that you did, like the more you practiced it was a skill that you could acquire. The more you practiced it, the better you got at it.
Mm.
And there was a third group that was more neutral. And basically they did a couple of rounds of experiment where you were exposed to a problem. You got to try to solve this problem, and then you had an outcome, of course, of solving this problem. Then the kids were invited to solve another round of problems. So they were told they told them that this is going to be harder. And they could find that the groups that had the story then that intelligence was a trait was unwilling to do so, because they were saying, no, I don't need to be challenged in this way. The second group of kids that had it more as a process, or as a, what would one call it, like this problem solving ability, a skill that they wanted to hone and practice, they said, yeah, sure, I want to engage in this. And the third group was more neutral. So you see clear differences between the priming. And then in the third case, you did it again with the same level of problem difficulty as the first time. And then you could see a clear improvement in the second group. Again, they had learned something, so they were better at it. And then most interestingly, I think, is that when they then were asked to write their pen pal in Germany about how they did, 40% in the first group actually lied about how they performed.
Wow.
And both of the other groups were telling the truth there, because there was no sort of connection of story into it. And so I think that's also, I don't know what it is, but it's a glimpse, I think, at least to how I've seen story in the sustainability work, and like how they influence us and our behavior and so forth. So just a question, like Martin, you've been looking at how people behave in relation to their own view of sustainability, or like being sustainable. You wanna lead us down that path? I thought that'd be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also like to add to something that Bill said before, which I find so interesting, like, because you also took this perspective of how important it has been through history and through time. And I find it so cool that we are, like, it's very hard to prove scientifically, but you could definitely argue that there's even like evolutionary value to it, because it's been such a major part of keeping our cultures, keeping our values, and getting it forward in different ways. I find that very fascinating, actually. And also, if you read up on like the hero's journey and stuff like this, like how these stories are just always returning, and it seems like the human psyche does not really get tired of it. They just put, in the same way that we like sugar, we also like stories. It's built in some way, which is really fascinating, I think. Yeah.
Unlike sugar, we may need stories more than we need sugar.
Yeah, fair. Very fair point. Very fair point. Yeah, because without meaning, yeah, it's a bit hard in life, for sure. Yeah, so how stories relate to sustainability. So definitely, there are so many things, so many paths you can go through here. So of course, it can be, stories can be used both beneficially, and also it can be negative in different ways, depending on what type of story you have, of course. So for some people, it's, I actually saw an interesting study about this quite recently, Journal of Business Ethics, which was talking about how women are more prone to be sustainable in certain topics, at least. And the reason for it is that it's not considered macho to be sustainable in different ways. It's considered more soft and feminine. And that is not always something that a guy wants to associate with. And so in this way, it's kind of hindering guys from being more sustainable because they don't identify. It's actually negative for them to identify with it. And then you have people that that do identify it to a very great extent. And then it can also be negative. I always find it more interesting to bring up the negative aspect because that's it's more thought-provoking. And of course, then it's the case that very, very interesting, I find, is that people that identify to be more sustainable or sustainability to be more of greater importance to them, many times also have an easier time of forgetting how sustainable or unsustainable something is, because they just push that memory away so that it doesn't create like a conflict with themselves in some way. So to give an example, this is not sustainability, but this is kind of similar. It's an example of my mom, actually, and that is that she's a vegetarian, which I am a flexitarian, like back and forth, I would say. But she has a candy that she likes a lot. And I was like, don't you want to read the ingredients list first? And she's like, no, I will do that after I've enjoyed my candy, because I don't want the conflict of it being like gelatin in this. So, and the thing is, the same thing can happen with other aspects, as we talked about previously, Amit. I have an acquaintance who's very much into sustainability and values it greatly. And if things tend, and also research suggests this as well, you tend to become more black and white. So for example, if she's taking the airline somewhere, it's such a bad decision, regardless of which airline she chooses, that she doesn't really care which one she chooses, even though there are great differences between them, because all of it is just so horrible. Whereas if you have some more distance to it, then maybe you're able to say like, well, it's horrible, but this airline company actually have newer planes that emit 30% less carbon dioxide. And therefore I've already decided I'm gonna fly, so I might as well just choose that one.
Mm. You lose some granularity, like when you don't, when you can't hold a thought. Yeah. Bill, you were headed. It sounded like you were going.
Yeah, I'd love to. So one of the things, and it's possible, given my American background, I tend to see there's a very strong story we have here about the individual. And it can often be framed as quite a separate story, that we're on our own journey. And there's some positive aspects to it, of like self-reliance, the rugged individual, the American pioneer, that, you know, you're doing it on your own and you deserve the credit for it when you win or make it. And those that don't make it didn't try hard enough. And so it's a very complex story, as most are. And I like to think of them like as, from a Jungian perspective, they have a light and a dark. And it's not a good or bad. There's the light side and then there's shadow side. And so as it pertains to transformation or sustainability and transformation, I think, you know, one thing that I see as some of the work that I'm doing with companies and their leaders is getting them to reflect on how lots of their stories are very individualistic and separate. So they exist as their own entity, their own company, and that circle is quite small, right? And then everything else is outside of that. And so it's a separate story, and it's a story that pits us against them, or we have our boundaries, and everything outside the boundary is not my responsibility. And what I'm responsible for is what's in my boundaries. So I'm responsible for my growth and development, but not yours. I'm responsible for my company's profit, but not for the negative externalities that might flow from trying to do the things to achieve that profit. And my argument is that if we don't work on that fundamental story of individualness and separateness, then it's very difficult to change people. So it's a bit of deck chairs on the Titanic. And I've seen this a lot where companies will come in and go, hey, we're going to do this big effort, CSR effort or sustainability effort. But it's done within the context of this individualistic boundaried story of we are doing this within our company. And it's not from a paradigm or frame that suggests, well, we aren't we. We has to widen the circle to say we're connected to the community that we inhabit, we're connected to the region that we are in, we're connected to the genius of place in our country and nation, we're connected outside of that via our supply lines. And so, you know, one of the shifts that I'm trying to do with people is, one, have them have awareness of their individual story and the limits of that. And then two, shift to the collective or interconnectedness story, like the living systems interconnectedness story. And then very importantly is show them what that unlocks a whole bunch of opportunities. Because if you're viewing it from an individual lens, then often those connections feel like threats or costs, right? And so it's until you make the shift into this new frame of interconnectedness comes with tons of opportunity and the ability to create a lot more value. I can't see that from the individual frame. And then I'll end on one last thing, which your story about the students triggered in me, is that there's another experiment that they did between East and West. So Westerners, and I don't remember if it was just Americans, let's just say it's just Americans, versus I think Japanese and Chinese. They showed them a painting. And the painting was a landscape painting with a person in it. And they asked them a simple question of, what do you see here? And how do you describe this painting? Almost invariably, according to this study, the Westerners describe the individual and what the individual was doing in the painting. And the Easterners describe the landscape, but not the individual. And that strikes me as just a very interesting example of how the different story in your head literally changes how you perceive the world.
I like that framing. I mean, it's so analogous as well with, or analogous is not the right word, but it's very much in line with, I think, what you're, I mean, this whole aspect of, or like the realization that you could have or can have, perhaps if you're using, let's say, mindfulness, or like if you're using those types of psychotechnologies, I guess you could call them, that you get you get an awareness of your filter. Basically, there's always a lens, like, or two, that you are taking in information through, and it's being filtered through something. Mm-hmm. And it's I mean, what do we call it? Somebody called that we're like sense making beings, in a sense.
Trying to be,
right? That's the ambition, or like it has to. You're unless it makes sense, it can get very uncomfortable. And I've heard several sort of different. I'm a podcast addict. I'm Amit. I'm a podcast addict. And a lot of them have been mentioning, this that very aspect of I kind of lost my thread there, but because I don't know where I was heading.
Well, it seems like you were heading to, well, at least this is what I picked up. My perception was that where you're heading was you're a podcast addict, and that's very much in my mind like you're feeding the intellect, right? And so you're feeding your knowingness from a particular perspective, intellectual ideas, thoughts, and so that way of knowing the world may be present for you. That's how I very much associate with the intellect. I mean, this is like where I go, and what I'm trying to train, and I have been now for some years, is the other intelligences, that there are other ways of knowing outside of what you can verbalize and what are in thoughts and theories and ideas. And so, you know, those other ways of knowing are like dancing and music and sound and art and visual things.
Yeah, that's exactly. And then there's the ability as well of like finding out or noticing how you know, in a sense. I think that's probably where I was headed, and that's so important in the story, because you have, I don't know, I mean, if you get emotionally, you know, engaged in one way or the other, how will that frame your story interpreting capability, in a sense, you know? I think those are interesting aspects. And I think, I mean, another part that we've been talking about in previously, and that's how I find you, Bill, and like how I found you, Martin, as well, like, is this personal development aspect of like adult development. How do you, if we increase our capabilities as individuals, how does that influence our storytelling? Does it change? Kind of going to what you were saying, Martin, if we can have a stronger sense of connection or connectedness to others, will that change our story in a sense? Is there a better story? Are there frames for stories that are better?
Well, I would also like to add something to what Bill was saying as well, because another thing that I find very interesting is that there are people that are, so obviously want this perspective of us as a community and feeling at least some sense of oneness with other people. But then there are people that feel very separate, but then they use the we-ness as an excuse for remaining like an I. So for example, and this you can very, very often pick up in like surveys and stuff like this, well, like, why don't you shop sustainably? Well, it's the government's responsibility. It's not my government, so it's not my issue. So then they're just deferring it to everyone else because everyone is in it. So it's very fun. Like on one level, it's kind of a paradox. Like if you're identified with we, then you don't have any power because you can't act as an individual because everyone is in it. And then you have the other issue on the other side. But in actuality, when you really start to look into it, it's a bit more complex and nuanced than that. So of course.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, and we do seem to, in all of our conversations as well, right? We always end up at this place of like holding the tension of these paradoxical opposites. It's like, and how do we hold these things? And, you know, and if I'm holding, you know, one side too tightly, then, or too deeply without being aware that there's another side, I don't know, that's usually when I find I get into some trouble or I can't see something.
It's very, very fun, I find. And it also connects to something we've talked about before, Bill, which is the fact that you, even towards yourself, you can be a bit insincere towards yourself, which story you're actually telling yourself and using them as excuses and stuff like this. And it's usually the case that if you want to see personal development as different levels, you sometimes believe that you're at a higher level than what you actually is. But like,
what did we say?
You have these stories, these beliefs, but in actuality, you're living according to something else.
What did we say? -2?
Yeah, something like that. Exactly.
At least, right?
Yeah. Whatever development level you think you are, it might be prudent to take 2 away.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's interesting in that sense, because we're also trading in different currencies, right? So I mean, I was going to go back to what you were talking about earlier, Bill, with the work that you do with companies. And
Mhm.
in that sense, and I mean, Martin, it'd be interesting to see like how you would chime in on that as well with regards to the story or the paradigm. Like, does it also relate to, let's say, measurements, like the KPIs? Like, are they really important in like the stories, like how we value stories in a sense? And how does that relate to sort of, I mean, sustainability is one part, but also how you interact, how you choose to interact with the world. Like in this, if you have the competitive story versus the us story versus the, I got the Douglas Rushkoff. I don't know where he's gotten it from, but he says there's this exploration in Team Human, I think, where he says like find the others, and then he was talking to an indigenous person, and he said the others is not that's not the other groups. It's not the people that think differently than you. It's like the others. It's like everybody. It's like the animals and like the whole ecosystem. So like depending on like how you frame yourself versus the others. I mean, you could frame it as humanity. You could frame it as this planet Earth, like spaceship Earth, right? You could frame it as, and so I'm both going for like this, the framing of who you include in us and them, and that sort of duality, if we're stuck in that. And if we are to transcend or like go above the duality of us and them and be more inclusive, more cooperative, then are measurements, like are the metrics important, like how we measure?
I'm not completely sure where you're getting at, but I may have an interesting comment either way, so we'll see what happens.
You always have an interesting comment either way. It's
yeah, exactly. So it might not be the answer you were looking for, but it's something. So when it comes to sustainability and getting people to live it more thoroughly, it's very like this old, almost like an old adage, but it's still true that like what doesn't get measured doesn't happen, or something like that. I think there's a better wording to it, but so because there are also legislation coming in, at least in Sweden, I think, and probably EU and other across the world, that you have to measure your sustainability impact as well. And of course, once you start doing that, then you can start measuring and see improvements and stuff like this. So of course, there's like, it's when you start measuring, you start to value it more because you can see a development. And when you start developing, you valuing it more, then you also want to create better measurements, and then it goes up and up and up. So I think it has it goes both ways. Like KPIs show the values that you already have, but KPIs also form the values that you as a company will have.
Yeah.
Was it answer to your question, or was it just hopefully an interesting comment? I don't know.
I like that, but just to stay on that then. So I mean, the process then of shaping the KPIs. I mean, I would see that as a part of the storytelling. Like, what do we agree on within these walls that we will measure as success, or like what are the metrics? And so I think it was kind of that. If we're stuck in a profit maximizing, optimizing story, or if we are in more of a complex situation where we would have more KPIs, and like expand the concept of like what we do as a business, like what's our job and what's the job to be done, and that we're
well, there's also another interesting aspect with KPIs, and this is probably contingent on which country you're living in as well, and how much your culture has evolved into thinking about sustainability. But and this is not science really, it's more of my personal opinion, but sometimes I actually get the feeling that when it comes to sustainability, there are almost too many stores or too many KPIs, because people get confused and they don't know how to act around it. So you can have, like in Sweden, we say we want to use less plastic bags. You should use a textile bag instead, made from like cloth or whatever it's called in English. But then you can also see some news articles saying like, well, actually one bag made from textile is equal to 80 years use of plastic bags according to this specific metric. But then you're mixing it up. So, I mean, all of these smaller metrics make sense if you have the complete picture looking at it. If you're literally like a PhD in sustainability, like the not my type of PhD student, but also someone that is, because I look more at what's profitable, right? But there are other people that actually understand like our entire ecosystem in a very profound way. Then it makes sense for them to look at the specific KPIs and not like cherry pick. But then when normal people like me, for example, who's even a bit interested in the topic, when you see these things, you just get confused and you don't really know what to do.
Mm-hmm. So here we are again at paradox.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, I'm going to try to refine my statements on this because I have so many ideas that want to come out at once. To begin, I would say, so KPIs. Yes. Do they matter? Sure. Absolutely. Like incentives drive behaviors. And so what we measure will often drive the behaviors that we have. And so on one side, we have that what it is we measure drives a lot of behaviors. So we should reflect and think about what we measure. And maybe measuring just profit in a very linear sense is not holistic and does not capture the entire nature of what a business is. Now on the other side, I think it was Deming who said both statements. He said, what gets measured gets managed, was his statement. And then on the other side, he said, and the most important things can't be measured. So I want you guys to do an exercise. So everybody close their eyes. Think of somebody that you love deeply. Mom, brother, spouse, sister, dog, whatever it is. Now translate that love into a measure on 1 to 100. Now come back. First, can you do that? Does 100 quantify the measure that you have for that being?
It's good that you didn't add a unit, I think.
Yeah.
If it would have been like money, it would have been harder in a sense. Like I sensed into that, like 100, just like it could also be, you know.
That's the next iteration of that experience is now do it and put a unit of money, right? And one of the things that you do in this exercise is feel what it's like to take this thing that's ineffable, that you just, yeah, I know this love. First, what happens when you quantize it, when you make it a thing that you just know into, well, it's 97.5. And then when you make the move to quantize it in a abstract form of it's 97.5, and that means roughly $20,000. That's how much I love my mom. $20,000 worth. Right? And so just hold that and kind of feel what that feels like. Does it feel useful? Does it feel good? And there's not a right or wrong on this, because this is a pretty big argument in sustainability is it effective to try to monetize the value of the Amazon so that we can measure it, so that we can then put in place practices because now we're valuing it, right? And I don't know what the answer is, but there's arguments on both sides of, if you measure it, okay, now it's a commodity and we can manage it appropriately. And there's another argument that says, but if we make it a commodity, then we've taken all of the actual value out of it.
It's also interesting to think about it in terms of a specific human being or you know, a person that you know the name of, that you are close, that you have a relationship with, or just a human being. I'm also thinking about it. I don't know if, I mean, we're probably tired of like the pandemic and all of that stuff, but I've been like very upset in between about sort of the story that's ongoing in Sweden with the pandemic and with the response that we've had, and like where it feels like we've discounted all the people that have died. it's a success. We can open society, and like, oops, 6,000 people, whatever. It doesn't. We don't have to. And like those are on they're already sort of what do you call it? Sunk cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're out.
Yeah, this is a wonderful example of thinking with the intellect, and maybe not with the eros, with the heart. And again, it's not a right or wrong. I think there are times when thinking, this is sort of the difference between compassion and empathy. Paul Bloom has a lot of really good stuff about this, where there's been a big push for empathy, right? We need to understand things from people, what people are going through. Yes, that's a tool. But he argues that empathy can also be manipulated and not helpful when you're trying to really solve for societal problems. Instead, one wants engaged compassion, so that I don't feel your pain, because if I feel your pain, I'm not going to be able to make the best decision for the most people. I'm going to solve for just this. I got to get this individual out of pain, but that might be a huge risk to society. So he has some really good work on that. I was going to go somewhere else and I've lost the thread. Oh, that you're this widening the circle. So as we go, I want to try to like highlight tools that people in the audience can use, right? So there's this widening the circle exercise, which is if you're making a decision, start with something that's dear to you. That's like, oh, what does this love feel like for somebody that I know? And then widen the circle out. What does it feel like somebody that I know less? Or what does it feel like for somebody that I don't know? And then as you widen this circle, you're attempting to try to not objectify that other person, but kind of connect them in this lineage of, I have love for my mom, I have love for my neighbor, I have love for my countrymen, I have love for this immigrant who isn't a countryman, but we're bound by this human connection.
It sounds a lot like or at least it seems to allude to like the Buddhist metta practice, right? With love and and kindness in a sense as well. I wanted to invite you, maybe Martin, you had like because we did a pre-call around this, and we had all these, we had a good discussion. It was a really nice conversation. I loved it. And then like towards the end of it, Martin said like, yeah, I had this one thing that I've been thinking about, and like I don't know if I should drop it in right now, but like and then he did, and then it just went very
this
silent.
One little thing, just this
one little thing.
It might be a really dumb thing, but it was huge.
So I just wanted I want to invite you to if you feel like it, however you want to set that up, but to ask that question again, because to me it's one of those things that have actually stayed with me for the past week, and like it's been working its magic.
Yeah, I would be very interested to hear what you have concluded during these days then afterwards. So we were obviously in our pre-call discussing stories, and when we talk about stories, it's a lot about, at least in my mind, stories has in the definition almost there is some sense of like you're telling yourself something that you cannot prove 100%, that is completely certain in some way. And we also talked about that stories you can have as you evolve as a human being, you can have different levels of stories, as we talked about before, like I and we, and how you should see this thing. Like you want to have the action of the I, but also identify with the we. And then we talked about how you work through these stories and you become more aware of yourself and the stories that you hold, and even change your stories. Then the question becomes, is there something after stories? Is this the end point, or is there something that comes afterwards? You want to add something to what I said, Amit, or did you think I captured it?
It's a really nice representation.
Yeah. I remember still the feeling of, You know, there's those moments in life where you're engaging, and we're kind of not on a script, but we're playing the game with each other, and you're like, oh yeah, story, and we're in the known containers. And then when Martin brought that question, this little thing that he had in his head that he didn't know if he wanted to ask, like, what is, if anything's beyond story, both Amit and I were just kind of like, oh, like it just sort of hits you like a, okay, that's a different level. I love when when those moments happen, when you're just like, it's like like something scrambles the brain in a way. Just kind of knocks you up the head, like a Zen
meditation
master.
bell. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to go deeper than that, than a
Yeah,
Zen
good.
master who's got the stick, and you know, whacks you on the back because you're slouching.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. That question was like, so
I wanted to open up, like, actually with that question to see if you know, what does it do to you guys in the call? Feel free to just unmute yourself, and we'll widen the discussion here, and like do, you know, yeah, where does it take you?
I just love that, because I was thinking about that quite early in the beginning. Since the kind of work I do is about taking the story apart, the story one is so attached to, and so invested in, and so blinded by, like you were mentioning, Bill, when the story so much we, and then suddenly that we makes you blind. And that, as you were talking, I just kind of thought that every story of high value, and whatever we would like to call it, has a shadow. And if you don't embrace both the light side of the story and its shadow, then you won't go to that space beyond. That's exactly what, for me, beyond story would mean. It would mean to become aware of both the light and the manifestation of the story, and the shadow that manifestation becoming more dense creates. And in that, it's like what happened to me in my mind once, is like plus the story, positive, my value, blah, blah, and minus. And these two, when they do like this, and then suddenly you're beyond story, and the mind is free to totally just walk away. And then, well, you see from a completely different perspective. And then you see aha stuff.
wow. Wow. That was beautiful. Maria Paz, can I share with you, I have goosebumps right now because something happened this morning. I was having a conversation with a Jungian therapist that I work with, and he explained things almost exactly as you explained them. That if you are unaware of the shadow side of things, then it will take you, right? Because it's there. You can't not have it there. And so he brought it to the American experience, and he says, you know, it's like if we're going through and we hold this racial tension, and he was saying, like, we're trying to fight, you know, either I'm not a racist or those people are racists. And you know, he says, to hold the shadow, you have to move to a place where you say, I am both a racist and I am not a racist. These are both two stories. And so instead of fighting it, you try to integrate. And so I am both. And the act of integrating and saying I am both then gives you the freedom to choose, right? And so it's this paradox is when you can accept that you are both, then you can transcend into that space that you described of like the higher truth. But we're so scared of the shadow. We're so scared of moving into it. And maybe you have lost touch with the practices. I think it seems that we've lost touch with the practices of playing with and integrating and saying, hi, shadow, I see you. Come on in, let's dance. Let's get to know each other a little bit. Yeah. So that, I mean, that I literally this morning was going through a very similar conversation, and the way that you said it was so beautiful. And,
yeah,
and
thank you for inspiring, because it came out of your conversation. It was born out of that and out of the own experience of having seen how the mind works and how duality creates this kind of, you know, it's like a kind of tension. This is the good stuff and this is the bad stuff, and then it gets more and more tense, like you're describing the racist, no racist, and you are in that polarity, and that until that tension is, it's just that let go of, you know. Then some people talk about the heart being the expanding space, and in that kind of aha intelligence is like enlightening you. I mean, that's what I call getting enlightened, you know, just getting out of the blindness. There's nothing else to it.
Yeah. It's quite simple when you describe it.
Very simple. Waking up each second.
Everybody got that? It's a simple tool. Just, you know, just hold the tension. Be the fulcrum was what my therapist friend said. Be the fulcrum. One other tool that seemed useful to me was to become aware that if you don't start to try to understand what your shadow is, you become quite dangerous to other people. Because if you don't acknowledge your shadow, it tends to become a projection onto others. You need to fix your life. You're the racist. You're not sustainable. You're the thing that I'm not acknowledging that I have a capability to be.
And if you look at it really close, Bill, in that moment, it's like a joke, you know, because it's like that vibration of being what we call racist or hatred or whatever. And the moment I see that, identify that as something negative, I am that already. It's the I has become that. In that blindness that you're describing, and it has never failed me. I mean, whatever, am I that too? You know, when oh my God, am I that too? You know. Okay, how am I that? How am I that? Very quickly, you know, to just clean up the surface.
He eased me into it by saying, because he said, you know, you can maybe ease yourself into it by saying, you're not that, but you have the capability for that. And so to just hold that space is a little, that's like a starter step to realizing you kind of are that, but first hold the space of like, well, I have the capability for, and then fill in the shadow, right? To be arrogant.
That's the kind of, I'm walking out of the room like holding my back, and I've realized that What really is the big enlightening thing is when I say, there is no I.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's say like this, the perception of beingness as a separate me in this moment becomes this I. I am not none of those, but there are many I's that pop up when I become that.
Yeah.
When I belittle, I would say when I belittle myself as a little I,
Yeah, yeah.
instead of the whole embracing. Now we're getting really out space here. That it's a little bit like you're saying too. I love that the capacity of the creation energy within us to become anything, and then believing we are that in that little particular moment, not later, not, but I am totally identified that I am the good one and you are the bad one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that I am the same.
Can I ask something? I'm sorry, like this is out of topic maybe. Is it ever good identifying yourself as anything?
Ooh,
Can you?
That's
Like,
a good question.
if we don't really know what is good and what is bad, if you want to stay neutral to it of good and bad and identifying yourself, like, isn't it better to just like, if isn't it very limiting every time you identify yourself with anything? Isn't there a limit it creates, like automatically?
Here we are again, paradox. So I think you're absolutely right. It creates limits. And I think those limits are often necessary for the doing of any self-development work and for any existence, really productive existence in the world. And so the creation of boundaries creates vessels in which you can work on things. And so I think limits and boundaries are necessary, and it's our attachment to them that becomes the dangerous thing. So it's not the limit or the boundary in and of itself, in my experience. It's my attachment to the identity. So if I become identified and attached to that identity, like, well, I am, in Amit's example, the kids that became attached to the identity of I am smart, right? Anytime they were shown information that suggested that that story might not be as true, they fell apart. They had an existential crisis. Whereas the kids who had boundaries, but were not identified with being smart, they were identified with the desire to work hard, right? They could progress much further because they weren't attached to an identity so much. So I think boundaries are necessary. It's like, when I work with clients, giving them a blank page is a recipe for disaster. And so we create vessels for them to, we have this phrase, they're tools, not truths. And so maybe we put identity in that frame of my identities are tools, not truths. They're tools for me to do my work. They're tools for me to show up in the world to you and kind of say like, hey, I'm Bill and I'm showing up in this particular way right now. I'm inhabiting the boundary and identity of story guy. But I'm not that. I'm also Bill who does jujitsu, and Bill who goes to Burning Man, and Bill who plays the hang drum, and Bill who played college football, and Bill who is a fun drinking party guy, and Bill who's a very serious businessman. And so all of these identities are useful, I should say.
you could probably switch the word, right? So instead of identity saying, I don't know, what comes up for me is like you could use lens or frame or, you know, something that might not be as contested in a sense. I don't know if that's like, if identity is contested, but I also like learned, that's what I've been sitting to think about here as well. Is like I've learned a new word. I've been listening to this John Vervaeke, who's a professor of cognitive scientist in Toronto, and he is talking a lot about transframing, and he's also introducing a new word for me, which is transjective. So you have objective, subjective, and transjective, you know. And so it is that those things, those symbols, those pictures, those whatever that allow you to step outside of the frame. So you have the frame, you're pushing against the frame, you're pushing against the frame, and then all of a sudden you're like outside of the box, right? Or like that frame. And so I think that the analogy that, I don't know if you know this 9-dot problem. Have you seen that? You have 9 dots, like 3, 3, 3, like 3, it's a cube like this. And then you have a task of like, you have to connect all of these dots using, I don't know what it is, like X amount of lines, you know, so it's just like too few lines. So you're always missing one, as long as you're with like, cause you're looking at this problem and you're seeing there's no frame there, but you're seeing a frame. Your mind is giving you a frame. And so in order to solve it, you have to draw the line like longer, like below, like you have the 9 dots and you have to go like below and like to connect the frame, because then you get the right angle of connecting these dots. But so it's like, it is like that. You, as long as you're within the frame, you're within the frame. And then once you've seen it, you can't really sort of unsee it. You know, it's like the way we draw a cube. It's the same thing as well. It's like, you can either see it in one way or the other way. Like, it depends. You can have like a perspectival shift, and that shift is the useful part. And so those moments of shift, at least that's where they are to me. It's like the moments of shift, and then it goes away again. So there's like, it's like you say, Maria, it's like, aha, and then it's like, oh wait, what was it? And it's beyond words. And I think what you were getting to as well, where we started, it's like beyond story, maybe beyond meaning, beyond sense, in a sense.
I would also just like to add to Elin's question there. And so this is just from my own personal experience, I would say. It feels like if you're into personal development, you're working on 2 different things when it comes to these issues. And one is to try to evolve the identities that you have, but also to try to distance yourself from them. So, and you work on both in parallel, because you need, like, it's, in my opinion, you may disagree with this, but in my opinion, it's almost like being enlightened and just being a monk or whatever, isolating from where you need your roles. It's kind of cheating in some way. In the same way, it's kind of cheating to just be in your roles, but don't have any distance to it. It's like, the trick is to do both in some way, I think. So you need them and you can use them as tools just to get up and up and up, and also you're trying to distance yourself from them. Do you see my point?
I praise the fact that you have a high, like that humans are smart.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think from my angle, I see humans differently right now. So that it's I'm reflecting on how intelligent we choose to be and how much we're using the things that are given to us, because I think people are smarter than they act. And I don't know. That's so I totally agree with all of you. I just, when I look at society, I get this feeling that there's room for more intelligence or just reflection and meditation, maybe just chill. And, yeah.
And also, I mean, there's a story as well with, sorry, you want to go, Mayra? Were you unmuting yourself? No, you weren't. Okay. There's also that story of I mean, where you were headed at some point during the conversation as well, Bill, where it's like, if I have, you can't have. That's the story that we tend to. So there's this whole idea of like, you know, economics or like money as a finite resource, you know, something that's limited. It's not something that everybody can have. That's not possible, you know. And then you also wonder, I mean, if you don't look at money as the currency, then are there other currencies that are, let's say, limitless, or like what do we value? That's what I was kind of also touching on, like at least mentally, I was touching on when we were talking about sort of this measurement issues. So like what do you measure? How do you measure? How do you quantify? You know, what if all companies would switch to love, you know, or like oxygen, or like, I don't know, whatever, like some other resource, you know,
Joy.
and also maybe, yeah, joy, right.
How much joy did you create in
Yeah.
your day today? Like, this is another tool, is by what method? I had a mentor say this, is like, again, in this measurement thing, is like, yeah, metrics matter, and how are you going to measure them when the things that really matter are the intangible things? But you can just ask the question, how much joy did I create today, and not have to put a number on it, but just feel it.
Right.
So I think what triggered for me for Elin saying about, you know, we should be bringing more intelligences into the world, and I wonder, that made me think, like, yes, multiple different types of intelligences. So we're very, you know, we're very rational. We're very much like, okay, problem, solve it, measure it, quantify it, you know? And I wonder if we can add to that the eros, the qualifications of, like, just asking how much joy and feeling it, and saying that's a perfectly acceptable measurement, that I know that I had a joyful day, and I don't have to know if it was a 96 or an 85 or 102 in joy. I know because I made somebody smile. That's a good metric.
And then
it's
I
funny
think the
also
other,
because it adds to like research on like how people chose to live. Like, it's almost a personality trait how people choose to live their life, if they are satisficers or maximizers in some way. And the moment when you start to think, like, all the time trying to evaluate how happy am I actually, it kind of is a long way down, because you take away from it because you're constantly comparing. I found this very, very interesting.
I love.
Sorry, Amit, you were saying something?
No, I was just thinking, it's a sidetrack to what you just said now, so it doesn't really, I had it in my head before you started talking, but like the aspect of sort of measuring or having to measure, I mean, it comes with the illusion of limiting, like limits, I guess. Like if you don't necessarily have to measure, or like we can't measure happiness because it doesn't matter. Like you could go around and give 100 of happiness. Like if 100 is the maximum, you could do, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, but it's like, there's no limit to it. And so like if we could find those types of variables, then perhaps that would be more conducive to. And then, I mean, the same thing, like you were getting to, like these different types of knowing, or like this different types of value or meaning, or like all of those statements are, I mean, they're words that mean a lot of things for a lot of different people, that are interpreted in different contexts and settings. And so that's what I mean by, like, are you, which might go to what you were saying now, Martin's, like, are you rich? Okay, if we talk money, then, like, I'm never gonna feel rich until I'm richer than the other guy, because it's like a mimetic, it's like a trait where we are comparing. But then, like, are you rich? Like, and if you change the currency, and if you and then, like, if you are rich on happiness, and then you're like, oh, but that's stupid because you can't measure that. I mean, maybe there's something to that, like the fact that you can't measure it. Maybe that's the thing, that's the point.
Maybe measuring it is the booby prize,
right?
as a mentor of mine would say. So I want to just highlight again, kind of like the tools here. So one, notice paradox and the tension. And I think we try to collapse things down into one side of the paradox, because it's hard to hold uncertainty. It's hard to hold tension. So the first tool is, like, hold the tension, be the fulcrum. acknowledge the paradox. And then the next tool is just asking yourself, hey, what is the shadow in this? Without having a right or wrong. It's like, yes, we should measure. Like I spend a lot of my work getting clients to try to measure things differently. And what's the shadow in wanting to measure? Right? And then what was the last tool? Oh no, I lost it.
It'll come back to you.
It'll come back.
Maybe letting go.
By what method? by what method, right? So you acknowledge the paradox, you ask for the shadow, and then you ask sort of like, well, by what method should we measure this, right? And so you said, you know, are we rich, right? And then you ask, okay, by what method, right? Are we rich because we have an abundance of things? Are we rich because we have an abundance of relationships? Are we rich because we have increased our capability to live another day? Are we rich because we've increased our quality of living that day? So there's I love when little kids walk onto Zoom.
Go ahead.
It's fantastic. It's not lost on me that they came in as we were talking about wealth being another day. That was the universe going like, hey.
Right, exactly. Here's a reminder.
Maybe that's what's really important. The wealth of another day, the wealth of more days for your children. So, yeah, I can't add anything to the universe. That's that's it.
Are there any other questions or thoughts or reflections? Just want to open up the floor. Melke, do you have any things that you've been thinking about throughout the discussion? Like anybody?
I'm thinking about the role of a story as a vessel for communication. Simon Sinek talks about this in his book, Start With Why, where he describes the part of the brain that is associated with feeling and emotion is very distant from the center that is used for communicating in when we speak. And I've just been pondering the role of a story that is necessary in order to attempt to communicate feeling, but will never really truly communicate the feeling, because the feeling itself is qualia, that the feeling is not able to be expressed through words, because those might be separate. The feeling might be deeper than the words that can describe it.
Yeah.
While you were talking this latest minutes, I was kind of, let's say like this, I found a beautiful quote once from the woman that guided me into finding deeper and deeper, and she always puts it, is it true, at the end. And then I send it to my son, because it was, you know, when something is so perfect, you just, oh my God, this one. So I send it, and life, blah, 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 something, is it true? And then I got this answer. Yes, no, both, and neither. Okay, I said, yeah, I can find all of them. So I think that our stories, depending in which level, from which level we're coming, at certain levels we need these methods and with all this, and we can refine them, and we can find something, and then we need kind of let go and rest where there are no stories and no methods and nothing, to be able to kind of, it's like a birth of expansion where we refine even more those ways that are used in this kind of dimension. It seems as if we move in different dimensions at the same time. There is this very grounded, very, you know, things have to work, you know, like kind of there are limits and there are forms and there are you and I, it seems to, and it's practical to work in a certain way. It's practical. And then you have this other more subtle, sensitive perception, communication, relationship thing where there's another, and then you have another very subtle part of perceiving reality. And in this, the rules kind of, if there are any rules at all, are kind of different. It's just what works in one place doesn't work in the other, let's say like that. So both yes, no, and neither.
That is it Melker? Did I say that right? What comes up for me as you're saying that is that the beauty of story is a story well told delivers a communication of the qualia and the emotion in it, you know? And so I'm reminded of this game that we used to play. We had this communications course that we would do. Well, before that, I do work with startups who have to get on stage and pitch their businesses to, you know, 600 investors and stuff, right? And always the problem with them when I start is they have information and no story. And the key difference is there's no emotion in it. They stand up and they go, "Hi, I'm Bill and I'm CEO of Sportify, and we're going to disrupt the $5 billion industry for sports socks. And here's how we're going to do it," right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of information there, but there's no why. There's no, why does this matter? Why did you choose to do this in life when you could have chosen all these other things? And so there's this popular study that said, like, you know, in story or in communication, there's three components. There's the words, the tone, and the body language. Which one do you think is the most important?
Body language.
Yeah. I always forget if it's body language or tone. I think tone was the most important. Body language, a very close second, like 55% tone, 38% body language, 7% the words, you know? And so we have this exercise that we would do. It's called, "There is not enough ice cream." That's the story. Uh-oh, we lost that. Oh no, Amit's there. The story is there's not enough ice cream. And we put people up in front of the room and they had to pick out of a hat a set of emotions. And there was like 10 emotions: angry, happy, sad, sarcastic, all these things. You pick out of a hat. And then it would be me having to say, "There's not enough ice cream" to you. And you guys had to guess what this was. So I would say, like, "Oh, there's not enough ice cream," right? Versus, "There's not enough ice cream." Versus, "There's not enough ice cream." Versus, "There's not enough ice cream." Same story, totally different meaning, right? So that's what came up for me when you asked about how does story convey the qualia, the emotion. Yeah. So, and then, you know, again, another tool that we can collect along this journey with us is, like, when you reflect on your story, what's the what's the qualia that you're putting into it? You know, when somebody asks you, hey, what do you do? Or hopefully they don't ask you that. It's a very boring question, but like, what are you into? Well, you know, I'm into, you know, storytelling, and I help people, you know, figure out their stories. Or, you know, I've been really interested in how stories affect people, and I'm working with people to change their stories. It's a different message. So there we go. We just collected another tool for you, for us, this collective here. And if we're in tool collection, Maria Paz had another one, which is, it's so useful when you're in story or somebody's projecting something onto you, is to just simply ask, like, is it true? Right? Is it true, and is it useful?
It's useful, yeah.
Something can be true and not useful, and something can be not true and very useful. This took me a long time to learn. I don't know if I fully have it yet, because I spent so much of my life trying to make sure that things were true before I could use them. And it was quite a hindrance.
If I may expand on it, do you want to go, Maria?
I was just a little comment, since that's what I've been working with the latest 10 years. Is it true? And it really doesn't matter. The thing is, are you aligned with it? Is it true for you to the core of being able to jump down into the hole and tell your friend, you know what, I've been here, I know how to. And you do that from the heart, and then you're totally there. So people will follow, and you get out of the hole. And not only that, but you see the sun rise, and you see the beauty of the world because you've seen it. And that's major truth, you know, your truth, being truthful to yourself.
I just got the goosebumps going off again.
Good.
Okay, do you want to?
A friend of mine says, then it must be true. He says.
That must be true, of course.
It must be true. Great.
True.
Yeah. I just wanted to tie this back into the field of sustainability, because I'm currently studying sustainability in ways. I'm constantly finding myself trying to communicate sustainability problems to other people, and what I find often is it is very hard to convey the complexity in a efficient story, so that it's graspable for the listener. And it's a challenge I would like to get better at, and I think there's a lot of people in the same situation as I am, trying to convey complexity in a way that's comprehensible. Do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Not surprisingly, I have many thoughts, but I'm gonna defer to Martin to I feel like I've been taking too much airtime.
No, it's completely fine, Bill. I'm still thinking, so you're more than welcome to go.
Okay, with your permission then.
Yeah, yes.
One, what you've identified is an exceptionally deep challenge. It's very difficult to convey complexity. And I think some tools that I try to use are metaphor and analogy. And so I'm like reminded of Richard Feynman, who is a physicist who won the Nobel Prize. He had an artistic gift for being able to take very, very complex problems and turning them into relatable metaphors that common people could understand. And he has, if you look at some YouTube videos of him, he's got a beautiful, like, kind of way of talking about it, of like, that we hide things in complexity often. And so, yes, things are complex, and it is also a method by which we hide and try to make ourselves, I'm not going to go down that road. It's just, the tool is like metaphor and analogy. I wonder if I have his book. His book is 6 Easy Pieces and 6 Hard Pieces.
And I mean, what also comes up in that sense for me is that the aspect of symbol or symbolism. I mean, it's very close to metaphor and analogy in a sense, right? But symbols, like what are really symbols? And symbols are, or one would now I'm loaded with all this sort of cognitive science perspective on this, but symbol is something that can take you through a bunch of things, and like something that you intuitively understand, something that you do not have to really understand intellectually, but you can also understand as something you know participate in, or something that evokes an emotion, or something that is allows you to, again, like with what we were talking about before with the framing, right? You jump out of that frame and you can kind of look back at it. It gives you like a different ways. I thought that was a really nice way of putting it. It's like, you don't, if you tell, I mean, again, if you tell a story, or if you tell a narrative, like if you frame it in a different way, or tell it in an adjacent way, you can maybe intuitively, without intellectually understanding the complexities, you can intuitively understand them in one way or another. Am I hearing you right there, Bill? Is that we're roughly where we're headed?
Absolutely, yeah. Symbol is, I think, a form of metaphor. And an analogy is tying it to things that people already know. And so if I know that you are a fisherman, if I can try to translate my complex problem into the environment of fishing, then I can translate to you this knowledge that I am attempting to try to convey, because we have a shared metaphor and symbols of fishing.
And there's
Can you
also,
please repeat your question, Milker? I'm not sure if I got it.
I was asking how to efficiently convey complexity to an audience or to a listener.
Okay. So in the because you want them to get the sustainability message or something like this.
Yes, I want them to understand the problems or the solutions or the perspectives that's going into it.
So if I go to from the practitioner point of view, when I worked with companies trying to get them consumers to choose the more environmental friendly alternative, many times, honestly, you just have to realize that you will not be able to communicate the complexity, and you will convince them for some other reason to choose the environmental choice, because it's simply too hard. So, for example, other assumptions that are many times made when something is considered sustainable, or some other positive benefits that are aligned with it. So for example, you might be able to produce a shampoo that is more environmentally friendly, and it will sell more, not because it's environmentally friendly, but because people assume a product to be more soft or gentle towards the skin when it's sustainable, and therefore they buy it. So you don't have to explain it. Otherwise, if you want to explain it, you really need to be able to first in some way, I guess, catch their attention and maybe try to direct them to some other site. But generally, honestly, when I've had real companies coming to me with this question, the advices, which I think have also shown to be the best advice, because some of them have not followed it, and they've still gone along and tried to prove it. It simply doesn't work. You have to come up with some other solution to get them to choose the sustainable alternative, because people will not care enough.
Kind of
so,
goes
for
to
example, if you have to inform them about, if you have a solution to a problem, but they don't even know about the problem, you first have to inform them about the problem and then inform them about the solution, for example. It's very highly unlikely it will happen.
It kind of relates to what you're talking about now. It's like the distinction between useful and true, in a sense. Like you could also sort of, I mean, a little bit shoehorn, but still, it's like it can be useful depending on like what you're trying to achieve, but it doesn't necessarily have to be true.
Yeah. Well, it also touches on a very like moral position in marketing, I would say, which it has to do with like manipulation, I guess, and like what is marketing, what is manipulation, what is a lie, and stuff like this. For me personally, if I tell a lie and get someone to choose what I'm 100% certain is a positive decision, I feel morally fine with that. But of course, this is like very much, it's a gray area. It's interesting because I've also actually worked with a Swedish agency on trying to building like the science, giving to the authorities for them to make the decision on what type of legislation there should be around commercials against children. So, but the underlying question is always, well, we want people to make reasonable decisions. And then my question is always, so let's say I lied to your son and got them to eat broccoli, or I tell them the complete truth but get them into some kind of addiction. Which one would you prefer? But the question is always like how you should communicate it. So this is another completely different topic, but yeah, that's more my personal moral view, I guess.
It also relates to story as a tool, you know,
yeah.
if you look at the whole topic as a tool.
Just for purposes of being provocative, because I like to be provocative, it keeps things, you know, interesting. In the context of story, right? Like if a story doesn't have drama, it's not really such a good story. You know, if the game was out of reach and it was like, yeah, your team was up by however many points, was it a good game? Or if it's down to overtime and you don't know what's going to happen, that's a much better story. But my provocation is I'm going to take the other side of what Martin's saying about the nudge. You know, is it? Let's use our tools. What is the shadow side of having good intention and right ends, but I don't know if the word, I don't want to use the word bad, but inauthentic means, meaning that like you're trying to trick somebody in a sense, but you're tricking them for a good reason because it's for their health. And I think the shadow side of that is that you're not helping build that person's sense of self-agency, and that you'll have a short-term win, but with the risks of a very long-term consequences. And so what comes up for me is we have a perfect example of this in the US as a result of COVID, is that when COVID hit, the authorities here went through a process of telling people that masks didn't matter because they reasoned that, well, they freaked out, right? They said, oh shit, we don't have enough masks for the healthcare workers and for the people who need them. So we've got to make sure that people don't go on a buying spree of masks. And so they told people masks don't matter. And they did it for the right intentions because they wanted to save the masks for the people who needed them. But what ended up happening was people found out, well, masks kind of do matter. And now what's happened is they have undermined the trust of the institution to such a degree that in the States now, masks have become this like political symbol. And there's a number of other things that feed into that, but I just want to present a counter example and a provocation that everything has a shadow side. So
just so exactly. So I just to clarify, because that's just like an outright lie which you're presenting. So what I'm referring to, for example, in the case of, I should have been more clear about this, what I was referring to about the case with legislation around commercials towards children. We're talking about, for example, should you be allowed to do like sponsored content for so let's say you have an influencer who's very big among children. Should they be allowed to do sponsored content? Yes or no? In which they say, I really like this, just so you know. Should this be allowed? There's no lie involved, but they turn into a yes or no question. So in my opinion, instead, it makes much more sense to be like, well, it kind of depends on what type of product we're talking about. So for example, yeah, it would be fine if they would promote something that has positive effects for the children. It would not be fine if they said the same thing for a gambling site, for example. Both are true, but it's manipulation in some way. But then, of course, lies should not be. Lies should never be allowed. No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean,
it's also arguably, this is another discussion, but it's also arguably, you could argue that there are other things that need to be in place when it comes to like political issues as well, where it should never be allowed with certain things.
I don't want to. I wanted to hold space for not, the provocation wasn't to counter your idea and say it should be allowed. The provocation was to look at the shadow and just say that, like, I'm really trying to hold this space of like, but yeah, be the fulcrum, hold the tension of like, yeah, we should consider that maybe there's situations where we need to lie. At least just hold that, just hold it. And when we hold that, hold the shadow of it, of what happens when we do that. And I'm sure if, you know, parents might say like, no, there's times when I need to lie to my child for their own good for a period of time. And I accept the short-term gain and the long-term consequences because, you know, fill in the blank. So, yeah. So yeah, my provocation was to not make it right or wrong. It was to just use our tools and say like, let's be the fulcrum, notice the shadow, and play with the what comes up, which is what I think you're saying about like, yeah, gambling, probably not a very useful thing, and but health food maybe is. I mean, how are we doing on time?
I think we're about to we should sort of round off. I had an idea. I don't really know how to fit it in. We've had like a really nice discussion and open discussions. I just first I want to like open up for any other questions or reflections from anybody, basically. We all talked out.
We covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Oh. I'm stepping in just for a second, probably to close down all of this. Sorry, I was late, a lot of late to this call, but I even enjoy like whatever time I spent here. And what I grasped before, it was you guys were talking about how can we like create society where our currency can be happiness, and actually how like company can create the happiness, and how we can create joy for each other, and our currency becoming actually not some papers, which is just the concept, but actual joy to each other, and how we're gonna like measure this. And the funny thing is that I'm co-creator of Public Happiness Movement, and and we are trying to create alternative economic system to empower local people to create an action for the global change. And that's exactly what we like tap into, and we all like volunteer based. So anyone who wants to be a part of this, please reach me out. I'm also in a group of Telegram, so you can find me there to talk more about this. And this is a huge question because we obviously would love to change the economic system, because it's a big thing which is incentivizing our actions on a daily life. Because what we noticed, like my partner was like 8 years volunteering and bringing joy all around the world. to people in the streets, but these people has to be like rewarded, and we want that people who created happiness in the world are rewarded. And it's again like big topic, a lot of things to go deep, but it's already like time is over. And I just wanted to say that, and I wanted to say something about measurements. Yeah, it's also like I think we should probably like stepping back and maybe stop thinking everything in like measurement, as someone before mentioned that, because that's what we do. Like that's what was industrial revolution. That's why we have the GDP thing, which is totally not shouldn't exist anymore. It should be happiness index measurement, how happy we all are and living and enjoying this life together. And the measurement should go like I think should disappear, this all things. But of course, till it's disappear, I believe we're gonna transform first to like measurements of our happiness and how actually we can make a big change altogether. That's just my 2 cents at the end. So happy to connect after, discuss, talk, just be happy together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. No, I think, that's really, thanks for those reflections. That's really interesting. I think one of the things that I wanted to it's not a tool necessarily, but I think it's a frame of analysis, or maybe a frame of structuring that one could also sort of keep in mind when we're talking about these different aspects of sustainability. And I don't know why it came up specifically, but it kind of did come up in a sense when you were talking. It's this sort of the different paradigms of like where you could, again, sort of relating to measurement or relating to what you're trying to achieve in the world with. I mean, we've talked about them, they've been implicit, but we haven't really made them explicit in this. But we're at a profit maximizing, or like at a competitive set. And then we're going to move. I think that the first move that people do is to less bad. So like, why are you sustainable? Well, we're sustainable because we're a little bit less bad, and then you might have even the fortitude or like the insight to say, no, I'm not, I'm sustainable because this is actually good. This is actually good. And then, but beyond that would be this paradigm of, let's say, regenerative, and that would be more complex, more sort of holistic, more understanding, more different measurements, more different things apart from these, I guess, stories that we tell us around profit and around money and around a lot of stuff. I was going to round off there. I'm just going to sort of take the last word and own it. And with that, I also wanted to thank, Bill and Martin. I've really enjoyed the process of getting here, and also for taking the time today. It's lovely. And also for having all of you guys sit in and listen and like co-create this with us. It's a fantastic discussion. Thanks for holding the space. I'm going to throw one thing out that I was actually thinking of doing within the frame of this, and invite, ask a few questions. But I was going to send the questions with you, I think, as just a gift, potentially. It's an invitation for inquiry, or it's a starting point for inquiry. So it's something where it's a line of questioning that's been helpful to me, sort of going back to that first story that I told about my realization about my own story and the framing of that story. And also, I think what you were getting at, Bill, as well, with like how you tell your story, how animated you tend to be, or like what words you use, and like what body language you project, and like how do you stand, or how do you connect with your story.
How do you inhabit your story?
Yeah, that's a good word. I love that. Thank you. And so one of the things that I wanted to invite you to if you feel inclined to look into your own story, then I would ask you, how do you stand in relationship with your story? What is your relationship to your story? And then, what would you be if you didn't have it? To try to capture that shadow side. And then also a suggestion. So, it depends, of course, of where you come from. Maybe you are, you know, super happy with the story you're telling about yourself, or, you know, you feel very grounded in that. But also to look at, you know, if you sense into it, if you feel your story, if you're thinking, doing this little meditation at some point, then, you know, if your story isn't amazing, you know, what would be an amazing story for you? And if you can't get to the story, then maybe you can look at the relationship. If you don't have an amazing relationship to your story, what would that relationship look like if it were amazing? And then finally, if you feel like it, if you get there, what is the first step? Is there a first step that you could take to start achieving it, to start living it, to start inhabiting it? All right.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, all of you. We'll be doing this tomorrow and again, but on other topics. And so I invite you to join in again, should you feel inclined. It'll be the same style, more concrete topics. I think this is the biggest one. And again, just thanks Bill and Martin for holding space here and like really sharing your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for holding the space for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Great to meet you all.
Yeah, great. Bye.
Martin, Amit, good to play again.
Good to play again.
The same.
All right.
Thanks. And thanks, Melker, for helping us out. All right. Bye, guys.